Welcome to Context. I'm Brad Harris. Just want to say thanks as always to everyone who makes this show possible by supporting me on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. If you value serious, independent work like this, the best way to help keep me going is to become a paying supporter. Supporters get every episode ad-free, along with an extra episode out of every 2 or 3 I produce. My last episode, for example, which I published on April 21st, was a bonus episode for supporters only. That one was a little different than what you typically find on the main feed, a little more personal. You can sign up at patreon.com/Brad Cole Harris or subscribe directly through Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All right, let's get to today's episode. Human beings, human civilization, has been trying to defeat death forever. But for the first time, we may be beginning to succeed. That's a crazy statement. Death, after all, is not merely one more problem on the human agenda. It is the condition under which every human agenda has ever been written. It's been the ironclad boundary around all ambition, all love, all civilization, all memory. We can postpone it, dignify it, ritualize it, romanticize it, rage against it, or accept it. But until very recently, no serious person could plausibly say that we might treat biological aging itself as an engineering problem. And yet, that is precisely what is now happening. Right now, in laboratories from California to Cambridge, some of the most credentialed scientists on Earth are working seriously on the biology of aging. They're not merely trying to cure one disease at a time. They're trying to understand and eventually intervene in the processes that make so many diseases increasingly likely in the first place. Jeff Bezos and other investors have put billions of dollars into companies devoted to cellular rejuvenation. Alphabet has funded a longevity lab for more than a decade. Nobel laureates, geneticists, molecular biologists, physicians, and computational researchers are now treating aging not as a metaphysical inevitability, but as a biological process with mechanisms that can be studied, measured, and potentially modified. Clinical trials are underway for interventions that could plausibly extend the period of healthy human life by decades, many decades. The pace of discovery is compounding in ways that would have seemed 20 or 30 years ago like science fiction. The skeptic's reflex is to wave all of this away. We've heard it all before. Every generation imagines itself on the verge. Alchemists in the Middle Ages imagined themselves on the verge. Court physicians and occultists and emperors imagined themselves on the verge. The industrial tycoons of the early 20th century imagined themselves on the verge. Silicon Valley is always imagining itself on the verge of something, usually while raising another round of funding. And most of the time, the skeptics are right. Most promises of immortality have been either tragic, fraudulent, or ridiculous. Human beings have been trying to escape death for thousands of years, and death has so far maintained a perfect record. But this time, something really is different, because the field of biology is no longer standing anywhere near where it stood even a generation ago. The aging body is not the same black box it once was. The cell is not the same mystery. The genome, the epigenome, the immune system, the microbiome, the metabolic machinery of the organism, these are increasingly legible systems that look more like ultra-sophisticated software than miracles. We have, in fact, just watched this kind of transition happen once already in a different space. For decades, artificial intelligence was a thought experiment, a scaffold for science fiction, a future that always seemed perpetually around the corner. And then, almost overnight, it was everywhere. Biology looks like it's about to cross that same kind of threshold. So, the question I want to explore in this episode has two parts. The first is empirical. Are we, in fact, finally on the verge of meaningful extension of the human lifespan? The second part is philosophical. What happens to a civilization that was built from its very foundations on the assumption that we die if we stop dying? Because every wisdom tradition humanity has ever produced, every religion, every philosophy, every ritual and poem and work of art that has ever moved us grew out of the long shadow of mortality. We've never had to think seriously about what life means without death. Before we look at what's happening in the laboratories, we need to understand what death has done to the human imagination. For all time, immortality was pure fantasy. And since human beings could not defeat death in the body, they tried to defeat it in story, memory, through their descendants, the monuments they built, their gods. This is why the modern biology of aging is not just another branch of medicine, it's entering territory that has belonged entirely to religion, philosophy, and literature. Indeed, the oldest story that survives in literature is a story about immortality. The Epic of Gilgamesh was composed in Mesopotamia roughly 4,000 years ago. It is, among other things, the story of a king who loses his closest friend to death and, in his grief, sets out on a desperate journey to find the secret of eternal life. He fails, of course. The gods will not give it to him. The plant that might have restored his youth is stolen by a serpent while he sleeps. And he returns home in the end, not as a man who has conquered death, but as a man who has learned the only consolation available to mortals, which is this: the things we build and cultivate, from cities to families, may outlast us. And so Gilgamesh returns to the walls of Uruk, the city he built, to live out his remaining days. Again, this was written 4,000 years ago. It's the first story we know, and it is already this story. That should give us pause. Human civilization begins, at least in the literary record, with a man standing before death and finding it both intolerable and inexorable. The death of his friend breaks Gilgamesh because it reveals the truth of what it means to be alive. His friend does not merely disappear, his friend shows him what he himself is. The beloved dead become a mirror, and in their absence, we see our own future. Every civilization has told a version of this same story. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, died in 210 BC after ingesting mercury compounds his court alchemists promised would help him live forever. Taoist traditions spent centuries refining elixirs of immortality, many of which killed the people who drank them. European alchemists devoted immense intellectual labor to the philosopher's stone, the mysterious substance that might transmute base metals like lead into gold, but more importantly, corruptible human life into something incorruptible. The medieval Christian imagination rested on the promise of bodily resurrection. Hindu and Buddhist traditions offered the possibility of rebirth, not simply as consolation, but as a cosmic structure. Even the pharaohs, burying themselves with granaries and servants and boats beneath millions of tons of stone, were undertaking an enormous engineering project aimed at defeating death. In other words, every civilization has chased immortality, and every civilization, having failed, has produced something else, a philosophy designed to address that failure. Religion, ritual, art, ancestor worship, the rhythm of funerals and anniversaries, the keeping of genealogies, all of it emerged in response to mortality's inevitability. The great human traditions of meaning making are not separate from the failure of the immortality quest, they are its result. Our entire inheritance of wisdom was built on a foundation that no one, until recently, imagined could ever be pulled out from under us. This is why our moment in history is so strange. The people working on life extension today are not alchemists. They're not looking for some exotic flower at the bottom of the sea. They're scientists working with the most powerful biological tools ever invented in an era when our understanding of life is advancing at a rate no previous civilization could have imagined, and accelerated now by the same artificial intelligence revolution that's reshaping so much else. The question is no longer whether we should take their work seriously. The question is how close they really are to curing death in some sense, and what it would mean if even the modest versions of their success proliferate. So, here is what is actually happening. Over the past 20 or 30 years, a revolution has taken place in biology. Aging used to be understood primarily as an irreducible fact of life. It was natural, it was universal, it was not a disease, and therefore not really a candidate for medical treatment. One could treat heart disease, or cancer, or diabetes, dementia, osteoporosis, arthritis, kidney failure, but aging itself was the background condition, the thing medicine could work around but not directly address. That is no longer the case. The emerging field of what is called geroscience treats aging as a biological process that contributes to many age related diseases at once. And the goal is not really to cure death, but to intervene upstream before the body's accumulating forms of damage and dysfunction express themselves as the familiar catalog of late life decline. The mechanisms are now widely understood. Telomeres shorten as cells divide. Senescent cells accumulate in tissues and secrete inflammatory signals that may damage their surroundings. Mitochondria lose efficiency, leaving cells with less energy and more oxidative stress. The epigenome drifts so that cells gradually lose some of the regulatory information that helps them maintain youthful function. Proteins misfold, the immune system becomes less precise and more inflammatory, etc., etc. None of these mechanisms alone explains aging. It is the entire ensemble of breakdowns, a symphony of small failures, each interacting with the others, that culminates in death. But that is precisely what makes the present moment different. The old singular mystery of mortality has been divided into dozens of specific mechanisms, and those mechanisms have become the targets. Consider the institutions. Altos Labs, founded in 2022, raised approximately $3 billion from Jeff Bezos, Yuri Milner, and other investors. One of its major scientific inspirations is Shinya Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize in 2012 for discovering that adult cells can be reprogrammed into a more embryonic like state. That discovery changed biology because it showed that cellular identity is not as fixed as it once seemed. Altos is trying to translate the science of cellular reprogramming into medicine while avoiding the obvious dangers of taking cells too far backward, including cancer or loss of cellular identity. Calico Labs, founded by Alphabet in 2013, has spent more than a decade working quietly on the biology of aging, drawing on major figures in genetics and molecular biology. David Sinclair at Harvard Medical School has built a very public career around his information theory of aging, sirtuins, NAD biology. Some of his claims have drawn skepticism from other scientists, but the underlying question his work represents, whether aspects of aging involve the loss of regulatory information that might be restored, that's real. Aubrey de Grey, the founder of the SENS Research Foundation, has argued for decades that aging is fundamentally an engineering problem. Identify the categories of damage, then repair them. He was once dismissed as eccentric by much of the mainstream. Not anymore. Consider the interventions. Senolytics, drugs designed to selectively eliminate senescent cells, which are those damaged, aged cells that stop dividing but don't die and instead hang around gumming up the works. Senolytics are now being tested in early human trials for specific age related conditions. Rapamycin, originally developed as an immunosuppressant, has extended lifespan in yeast, worms, flies, and mice. Metformin's another one, a cheap generic diabetes drug which has now become the subject of a landmark effort called TAME, led by Nir Barzilai at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, to test whether it can delay multiple age-related diseases and help establish a regulatory pathway for treating aging as a modifiable process. Then we have GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic, originally developed for diabetes and obesity. These are now being studied for broader effects on cardiovascular disease, inflammation, possibly neurodegenerative risk. Another intervention I've already mentioned is cellular reprogramming, which has shown astonishing rejuvenating effects in animal studies, though the central challenge remains how to achieve those effects without causing tumors or destroying the identity of the cells being treated. And of course, artificial intelligence has begun to accelerate the entire enterprise, predicting protein structures and designing new molecules, compressing decades of drug discovery into months. This is a lot. So let's take stock of what it's actually adding up to. Health span extension, living healthier for longer, and compressing the period of decline into a shorter and shorter final window is now genuinely within reach. The first generation of serious interventions will likely be commercially available within the next decade, and many of them will add 10 or even 15 years of productive, vigorous life to the end of the normal human span in the form of treatments for fibrosis, osteoarthritis, immune decline, metabolic dysfunction, neurodegenerative risk, or frailty. They may come disguised as ordinary medication, but if they work upstream, if they delay several age related diseases at once, then the effect could be revolutionary even without looking revolutionary at first. So that's health span extension. But next, we have meaningful lifespan extension, the kind that might eventually add 20, 30, even 40 years to the average human lifespan. And that may be available within the lifetimes of many people alive today. Then there's radical life extension, the kind that would make human beings effectively immortal, barring accident, violence, or catastrophe. Now, this still remains speculative, but even this is actually on the scientific agenda now. Okay, let's conservatively assume we establish a new normal by the middle of the 21st century, where most people in developed societies can expect to live to 110 or 120. This would be culturally and philosophically seismic. Which brings us to the deeper question in this episode. If the scientists succeed in giving us that gift, what would we be losing in exchange? The American author Ernest Becker wrote a book in 1973 called The Denial of Death. He won a Pulitzer Prize for it posthumously. He died of cancer before the prize was awarded. Becker's central claim was unsettling because he argued that the terror of our own mortality is the hidden engine of human culture. Not only every religion and every work of art, but every political ideology, every act of ambition, every commercial enterprise, every monument and cathedral and novel and empire, all of it, Becker argued, is a set of immortality projects, human attempts to transcend death symbolically because we cannot transcend it literally. We build cultures, Becker said, because we die. Take death away, and the engine that powers human progress runs out of fuel. Becker's not the only voice in this tradition. The philosopher Bernard Williams published an essay also in 1973 called The Macropolis Case. Williams built his story around a protagonist who lived for 342 years and came, at last, to want nothing more than to die. The desires that make human life worth living, Williams argued, are determined by their finite quality. Eventually, an immortal life exhausts every meaningful desire, and what remains is repetition, boredom, and the hollow continuation of a self with nothing left to pursue. Immortality, in William's view, would not be the gift it appears to be, it would be a curse dressed up as a blessing. Many other writers and philosophers through the ages have argued the same. Death gives life shape. It forces choice. It prevents infinite postponement. It rescues us from the paralysis of endless options. A finite life has narrative form because it has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we all know, at some level, that a life without limits might become shapeless. An immortal being might not become more human, but less. And yet, here is where the argument stops being theoretical for many of us. If you've ever watched a parent grow frail, you know what is actually at stake. It's not ultimately a selfish desire to live forever. It's not vanity, or at least it's not only vanity. It is the unbearable fact of watching the vitality of someone you love leak out of them in real time. The process is slow enough that it becomes a kind of permanent condition, a low and steady grief that you simply learn to live with. A dad whom you once admired as the strongest person in the world becomes smaller and more vulnerable. A mother who lit up any room she entered becomes arthritic and gray. The tragedy is not merely that we die, it's that the particular constellation of people who make our world delightful is so fleeting. That's where death actually hits hardest. It's the slow, visible subtraction of the people who made us who we are, and the knowledge that we are next. Which is why the contrary argument, the argument that says we should defeat death, carries such force. The philosopher Nick Bostrom made it most memorable in a short parable he wrote in 2005 called The Fable of the Dragon Tyrant. In Bostrom's story, a monstrous dragon demands a daily tribute of human beings from the kingdom over which it rules. The kingdom has accommodated itself to the dragon for so long that it has developed philosophies, religions, art forms, bureaucracies, and noble speeches justifying the tribute as natural, necessary, even meaningful. When a technology finally appears that could kill the dragon, many of the kingdom's wisest voices argue against using it. They've built their understanding of dignity around submission to the dragon. They cannot imagine who they would be without it. Bostrom's point is simple and sharp. The dragon is mortality. We have rationalized death so thoroughly that we mistake it for a feature rather than a bug. Every philosophy that tells us death gives life meaning may, in his view, be a kind of civilizational Stockholm syndrome. We've spent millennia making peace with an enemy because we lack the power to defeat it. Bostrom draws an interesting parallel to slavery. For most of human history, slavery was treated as part of the natural order. Entire moral systems all over the world accommodated it. Serious people everywhere defended it. Economies depended on it. The fact that something is ancient, universal, and culturally productive does not make it good. Bostrom's wager is that mortality may be the next such awakening. So, which is it? Is death the hidden source of human meaning without which life grows hollow? Or is death a contingent evil we have mistakenly sanctified because we could not defeat it? This is not a question with an obvious answer. It is a genuine philosophical dispute. being conducted now not only in books and seminar rooms, but in laboratories, venture capital firms, regulatory agencies, and clinical trials. Let's circle back then and think more concretely about what even a modest extension of human life could mean. Human society is built around a predictable life arc: childhood, education, work, marriage, reproduction, inheritance, retirement, decline, death. Extend healthy life by a few decades, and every stage of that arc begins to detach from the others. Careers would probably change first. People would remain vigorous and professionally capable much longer. Some would reinvent themselves entirely at 60 or 70. Others would stay in active leadership positions into their 90s or early hundreds. Generational turnover in politics, universities, corporations, law firms, artistic institutions, and media could slow dramatically. The young would wait longer for the top to clear. Ambition would stretch across a longer horizon, but so would frustration. A civilization of long lived adults might gain wisdom and continuity, but it might also become more risk averse and slower to innovate. Marriage might change too. A vow that once meant, till death do us part, across perhaps 40 or 50 years, means something categorically different when it stretches towards 70, 80, or 90. Imagine not the occasional extraordinary couple celebrating a 50th or 60th anniversary, but millions of couples contemplating their 80th or 90th anniversary. Some would savor that prospect. The depth of companionship, the accumulated private language of a shared life, the knowledge of another person across nearly a century. There is something beautiful in that. But we should not pretend it would be that simple for everyone. The statistical probability of two people remaining compatible across such spans may decline. Divorce might become more culturally ordinary. Romantic commitment itself might acquire a different texture. Marriage could either become more sacred or more modular, more enduring or more episodic. The point is that we don't really know, because human beings have never had to organize intimacy around such long expectations of vitality. In any case, family life would probably change a lot. If people remain fertile for half a century or more, parenthood may stretch significantly. People might find themselves having another child at the same time as their older child does. A first child at 50 or 60 may become a new normal. Multi generational families would become wider and more complex. The old 3 or 4 generation bubble might expand to half a dozen or more. Children could know great grandparents not as remote, fragile figures, but as active adults. That would be a profound gain, but would also complicate the family as an institution. Authority, inheritance, caregiving, obligation, memory, all would be rearranged. A family with 5 or 6 living generations is not simply a larger family, it's a different kind of social organism altogether. Demographics would certainly change. Now, fertility has already collapsed across much of the developed world. A civilization that lives longer but reproduces less becomes a civilization with an inverted age pyramid. More old than young, more dependents relative to workers, more voters with memories of the past than children with claims on the future. The economic and political consequences of that inversion are already visible in countries like Japan and South Korea. Now, longevity science could soften some of these problems if it keeps people healthy and productive longer, but it could also deepen them if longer life simply means longer claims on systems already under strain. The difference between a society of frail 90-year-olds and vigorous 90-year-olds is enormous, but even a society of vigorous 90-year-olds would be politically and culturally different from any society humanity has ever known. These are the near-term consequences, the ones we can already imagine in light of modest lifespan extension. But the long-term consequences of radical life extension are of a different order entirely. The thing is, the same historical and technological pattern that brought us artificial intelligence is likely to bring us immortality. We spent decades writing about AI in our science fiction, treating it as a philosophical thought experiment, and then one day it was in our phones and our classrooms and our economy. The sci fi became a self fulfilling prophecy, and there was a kind of inevitable historical logic to it, given human nature and the incentives of the modern economy. The same thing is about to happen with immortality. Immortality is far too alluring not to pursue. The incentives are too strong, the demand too deep, the capital too committed. There is no coordinated mechanism that could stop it, and no coalition that would want to. And it will arrive the way AI arrived, slowly at first, and then all at once. Most people will dismiss it as science fiction until the first generation of senolytic drugs becomes routine, and then they'll dismiss the routine drugs as trivial until cellular reprogramming therapies become routine, and then dismiss the therapies as administrative until one day they look around and realize that everyone they know expects to live practically indefinitely. The truly profound shifts will get smuggled in through paperwork. The ethical and religious and philosophical implications will be buried under insurance codes and FDA approvals and administrative updates. And that's how a civilization changes radically without ever agreeing to change at all. But we should make no mistake, it will change. And here's something that's really got my imagination spinning. Even if fertility continues to decline, many people will continue to have children because loving someone and wanting to build a family with them is hardwired into a great many of us. And so the human population would end up expanding even faster across ever-lengthening lifetimes for which we have no precedent, eventually to the point when the prospect of leaving an overcrowded Earth becomes increasingly attractive. A species that lives indefinitely and keeps producing new members will need somewhere new to go, which is why the era of life extension is also likely to be the era of genuine expansion into the solar system. The same advanced technologies that make life longer will make it increasingly plausible to live beyond Earth. Artificial intelligence, biotech, orbital engineering, material science, closed-loop agriculture, synthetic ecology, and practically limitless solar or fusion energy are not separate stories. They are one story. The story of our civilization at long last spreading into space, just like we kind of knew we always would. We've been writing about that for decades too. First, it will be a permanent moon base, then a Mars settlement, and ultimately something more consequential. Vast, self-sufficient states orbiting Earth or the Sun, not sterile metal ships like in Star Wars, but rotating worlds built on the scale of megacities, their enormous rings turning with mathematical precision to simulate gravity. Inside of which would be whole landscapes, forests and rivers running through engineered valleys, weather designed to mimic temperate gardens, neighborhoods arranged beneath a curving sky, and whole communities built around the inexhaustible human dream of beginning again. For the wealthy and ambitious at first, and later perhaps for entire societies, these artificial worlds would offer something Earth increasingly struggles to provide: plenty of room, high-trust civil order, remarkable beauty, and the intoxicating possibility of avoiding the mistakes of the planet left behind. The appeal would not simply be escape, however. It would be creativity and discovery and adventure. To leave Earth would be to enter a world where the basic conditions of life, energy, climate, architecture, agriculture, law, education, even the rhythm of day and night, could be deliberately designed by industrious and adventurous people who find a new source of meaning in the centuries they live out up there, where the building and growing goes on. A few centuries or millennia from now, our present moment will not look like the beginning of the future. It will look more like the end of the past. Everything before the twin breakthroughs of artificial intelligence and immortality will belong to one age of human existence, and everything after will belong to another. The divide will be deeper than any civilizational line ever drawn before it. We are already the last generation of human beings who knows what the world was like without artificial intelligence. And we are likely among the last generations for whom mortality is a given. This is the end of a 100,000-year era, and we get to witness the end and what comes next. What an insane time to be alive. And so, what this really means is that we are among the last generation of human beings for whom being human still means what it has always meant. I'm Brad Harris. So long. Thanks for sticking around for one final note. If you know someone who would enjoy this episode, the most helpful thing you can do is share it with them. Word of mouth is still the main way a show like this grows. And if you'd like to support my work more directly, you can subscribe on Patreon, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify, where supporters unlock a bunch of additional bonus episodes. I'll also mention that my earlier podcast, How It Began, A History of the Modern World, is now available as a complete 20-episode collection at howitbegan.com. It's a cinematic history of the innovations that built the modern world, from electricity and surgery to coffee, money, the English language, dog domestication, the internet, and more. Again, learn more at howitbegan.com. Here's a preview of the series. How can we make things better? This is the question that motivates the modern world. With the turn of your wrist, you ignited a spark that set off a cascade of explosions that would propel you rapidly through space. Midnight, Paris, France, 1536 AD. A 22-year-old medical student named Andreas Vesalius feels his heart pounding in his own chest as he slices into the dead chest of another. Through the 1500s, men began to regularly drown by the thousands for lack of knowing where they were upon the sea. A Christian monk, huddled over his desk, struggles to warm his cramped fingers amid the winter chill of northern Europe. With all of the unglassed windows and light wells of the monastery, there's little difference in temperature between outside and inside. There is a man standing alone on the crest of a hill. He'll be gone in less than 15 minutes, dead from blood loss. Just another body on the ground, along with 8 million others that have and will continue to pile up here in the name of God. Welcome to Europe in the 1600s.